So we'll begin, ladies and gentlemen. Here in today's class, I will strive to offer 3 tools that Judaism has to offer in order for each and every one of us to be able to truly navigate these anxieties and these moments of stress in the best of ways, in the most fruitful of ways. And I will begin with a reference from this week's portion. I really believe it's no coincidence. It's quite amazing to me, but it's really no coincidence that this week's portion begins with the commandment of observing the Sabbath, the Shabbat. Why is it no coincidence? Because it's amazing to me. I mean, feel free to disagree, but it's amazing to me that it seems like the whole world is going to celebrate Shabbat this coming Shabbat. The whole world is going to be observing this first commandment in this week's portion. Everyone is exercising social distancing and seclusion, and we have indeed the opportunity to observe the Shabbat as our Torah commands us in this week's portion. But if you look at the first reference, speaking of the observance of Shabbat, Exodus 35:2, it says as follows, and again, I encourage everyone to open up your handouts that were attached to the chat. They appear as a PDF document, so feel free to open those up on your screen. But this is what it says. For 6 days, sorry?
I didn't get the PDF.
Oh, so if you press chat at the bottom of your screen and you scroll down the chat, you'll see a document that I shared with everyone. The document's name is Taking Control of Our Anxieties.
Okay.
And then you got it? Okay, good. Oh, all right. I'm going to share it one more time, just in case. Sharing it here one more time. Okay. Done. That's it. Okay. So Exodus number 1 says as follows: For 6 days work shall be done, but the 7th day shall be to you a holy day, a Sabbath of rest to God. It's fascinating that the Torah uses the verse or the expression of 6 days work shall be done. Not 6 days you shall work, but 6 days work shall be done. What does that mean? Does work just happen automatically? Don't we have any participation in working? Don't we have to make a living, as we say here in America? What does this mean, work shall be done? Does it happen passively? And there are many commentaries that explain this bizarre expression, but my favorite of all comes from Rabbi Schneerson, the late Lubavitch Rebbe in Likutei Sikot. It says as follows: the passive form suggests that even during the week's 6 work days, when the Jew is permitted and obligated to work, he should be occupied with, but not preoccupied by, his material endeavors. In other words, what does this mean, that work shall be done? No, it doesn't mean that we do not have to actually go out and work. But what it means is that when we do work, we should remember that our God is participating with us in this work. We are not being fully immersed in this work and fully in control of this work, because there's a partner that is partnering with us, and his name is God. So work is done by 2 people, by 2 entities, us and God. It's not just us in full control, but God comes, so to speak, to hold our hands and make sure that work is done together. That's why, again, the expression of the Torah in this week's portion, no coincidence, that work shall be done. But friends, I want to emphasize this point because I think it really stresses one of the great differences between Judaism and other religions. You know, as other religions may see our relationship with God in a very different way. For example, Islam means to subdue yourself. And that's because they believe that the relationship with God is a relationship between a slave and a master, God being the master, us being the slaves. Christianity, for example, I think believes in a father and son relationship where we might be the children and God is our father. Judaism doesn't quite believe in that type of relationship. The relationship with God is very different. We are partners with God. We are not slaves and God is our master. We are not just his children and he is our father, even though there are analogies that point to that. But most importantly, we are partners with God. That's why, if you think about this, the word for mitzvah, which is usually translated as good deed, does not mean good deed. The word mitzvah in Hebrew means joining hands, means partnering. It comes from the word in Hebrew tzevet, which means to partner, which means one entity. And again, that is because we believe, guys, again, I'm going to ask you to mute. I'm going to mute again. Mute all. Okay. And that is because we believe that, again, God is our partner. And that explains why, by the way, when we see evil happen in the world, as we are seeing these very days, we have all the right to say to God, hey, you're our partner. Do something about this. We're trying to do our best. We are devoting ourselves to bettering the world. But God, if we are partnering in bettering the world, then you have to do something about it too. And therefore, we encourage shouting to God. We encourage prayer in Judaism. We encourage even arguing with God. As Rabbi Levi Yitzchak famously says, we can be with God, we can be against God, we can't be without God. But again, we can be against God because he's our partner. And we can say, it's time for you to better this world as we are trying to do. And yes, in these days, to eradicate this terrible plague, this terrible coronavirus, this terrible pandemic. Now, speaking of God partnering with us and helping us do our work, and therefore, again, the expression of work shall be done because it's not just up to us. There's a beautiful idea that's presented by Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, who lived about some 80 years ago, who was one of the great scholars of Judaism. He has a great commentary on the Torah. But Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz shares the episode that's how the Jews would be escorted by clouds during the 40-year journey in the desert. Now, these clouds would embrace us all together. And he uses this description as a metaphor of God embracing us, not just in our 40-year journey in the desert, but throughout life in general. It's as if God is always sending us a cloud to embrace us, is always hugging us. And all we have to do is to really become in tune with that idea that God is always with us, as he was with our ancestors in the desert. There's a cloud of God that's always embracing us. And because specifically, as we mentioned, he is our partner, and partners don't let each other down. And when we feel like we are falling, God is there carrying us. And I think one of the great analogies I heard was, think about this. All mothers here can relate to this, I'm sure. But think about this. Say you have an infant that is traveling around the world with you. Now, today, unfortunately, travel is being very much limited. But say it was like in the good old days, you can go where you're in Scottsdale. So from Phoenix to New York, from New York to London, from London to Paris, from Paris to Tel Aviv. Now, say the infant is traveling with you. And again, he does the same route from Phoenix to New York, New York to London, London to Paris, Paris to Tel Aviv. Once you land in Tel Aviv, someone stops you and asks you, mother, where were you? You'll tell them, it's very simple. I was in many destinations: Phoenix, New York, London, Paris, Tel Aviv. If that same person would then ask your infant, where were you? The infant would say, I don't know. I was just in my mother's arms. I was in her embrace. And it's the same way we have to view our relationship with God. Because in life, we travel to many destinations, not just physical, geographical destinations, but mental destinations. Think about this. Our mind goes at the speed of light all day long. We jump from one subject to another subject to another subject. That in of itself can be exhausting, like physical travel, like that travel of the mother that's going from one destination to another. But the infant does not get exhausted from all of those changes. Why? Because the infant knows that no matter where he or she is, they find themselves in the embrace of their mother. So too, we must internalize that same thought, that no matter where our mind travels, we are in the embrace of God himself. And that in of itself should give us the strength, should give us the ability to truly navigate through these uncertain times, because we know that God, our partner, is holding us tightly in his arms. I will mention a story that's become famous over the past year or two. But it's a story that, I don't know if it's true or not, but about an actor who would give a Broadway show, would be on Broadway for some 20 years, and every single time he would end his show with Psalm 23. And if some of you know the story, but he would sing it and he would act it, and everyone would end the show. He would end the show on a high note, and then everyone would give him a big round of applause. One day after 20 years, this elderly Jew comes to this actor and says, "Look, I've come to your show many times. I know that you end the show with Psalm 23. If you don't mind, let me today conclude the show with Psalm 23. The actor says, "What are you talking about? This is the high note of the show. I can't let you do it." The Jew said, "Please, I beg you, I promise you I won't deceive you." Man says, "Fine, I'll let you." That day, he asked, at the end of the show, he called the elderly Jew on stage and he said, "Go ahead, you'll conclude now with Psalm 23 as I've been doing each and every show for 20 years. The elderly Jew starts to sing the song, but of course with a cracked voice, he's a little off tune. The actor doesn't know what to do. But lo and behold, after he concludes Psalm 23, everyone in the room is in tears. The actor can't believe it. He's never received such a response. So at the end, he grabs his microphone and he goes to this elderly Jew and he says, "You've moved us all. How did you do that? It's never happened to me." And the elderly Jew says, "Well, we both know what Psalm 23 says. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. The difference between you and I," he tells the actor, "is that you may know Psalm 23. I, on the other hand," the elderly Jew says, "I know the shepherd. I know the shepherd, and my trust is in him fully." When you have that level of connection, people sense it, and they cry, and they are moved, and their lives are enhanced and empowered. And I think that, in a way, that's our duty, especially as parents here, to show that our level of connection with God, with our shepherd, is a level that has that is infused with complete trust. It's a level in which, indeed, we know, we feel, we sense at all times that he is carrying us in his arms. It's a level in which we, as his partners, can have conversations with him and say to God, "Look, we know that you're there for us. Now, please, you be there fully, unreservedly, by healing this world with all of the healing that it needs." That, I think, is the first and foremost tool that Judaism has to offer when it comes to navigating through uncertain times, knowing that we are not alone, knowing that there's a God that is a partner with every single human being, a God that we can have full trust in, a God that carries us in our arms, and a God that ensures that his blessings of healing come forth. That's point number one. I want to conclude this point with a powerful line here from the Tanya, authored by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And again, it's in your reference sheets here at the bottom of the first sheet. But it says as follows: "This is the essence of the faith for which man was created." Listen to this: "To believe that there is no space devoid of him, and confidence and joy are in his place, because he is but good all the time. Therefore, a person ought to be happy at every hour and live by his faith in God, who animates him and acts kindly towards him at every moment." These are powerful words that express this complete trust, not just in our Master, not just in our Father in heaven, but most importantly, in our partner that is holding our hand all the time. I conclude just this first tool, by a story that I heard personally from Rabbi Nissan Mangel, who many of you may know. He's one of the first translators of the Siddur, the prayer book that we have. You can look at his translation. I believe it's one of the most accurate translations also. He added his own commentary to Rabbi Nissan Mangel, but he tells the story of how he was one of those children. He was just 11 years old on the death march between, as we all know it, between Poland and Germany. And at one point in the death march, he almost collapsed. He could not carry on any longer. His legs were frozen, and every iota of his energy was gone. And he didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden, his mind took him to one of his most fond memories. As a child, he remembered his father would walk with him to synagogue each and every Shabbat, and he would share with him the story of the Baal Shem Tov. What story? The story is about a Hasidic Jew who once came to the court of the Baal Shem Tov on a Friday night, on a Shabbat. And he told the Baal Shem Tov, "I am here, but on the other side of the village, my wife is pregnant and she could be giving birth any second. And I'm in this most unstable mode, I do not know what to do. Should I stay here with you, Baal Shem Tov, or should I traverse the village in spite of the dangers, in spite of the darkness, in spite of the bandits, and go back to my wife, lest she is giving birth? The Baal Shem Tov said, go back to your wife. She might be giving birth. But remember, don't be afraid, because a Jew never walks alone. The man went back, traversed the dangerous forest, went back to his wife, and thank God he came on time. She was able to give birth healthily and smoothly. But here is Nissan Mengel, the 11-year-old boy, walking on his death march. He's about to collapse, and he remembers this story told by his father each and every Shabbat as they were walking to synagogue. And he says to himself, oh, wow, I find myself now in this dark and wintry forest. But I remember the words of my father that reverberate in my mind. Indeed, a man never walks alone. God is always with him. That, my friends, is, I think, tool number one. We really have to internalize. I know it's easily verbalized, and it's much more difficult to internalize this idea. But we do indeed have to enhance our connection with God during these times. Maybe pray a little more, study a little more. But all of that will help us, again, internalize this idea that God, our partner, is with us and we never walk alone. That's tool number one. If you go to the next page, again, the reference sheets are on the side of your screen in the chat column. If you have to press chat at the bottom of the screen first to access that chat column, please do so. But in any case, if you go to the second sheet right here, tool number 2, I believe, is the power of now. My dear Rabbi Steinsaltz, very often says, and I wrote about this in this past week, that unfortunately our society is so obsessed with the future that we can never really connect to the present. Think about this. It's so true. I mean, I make this mistake all the time. But when we send our children to school, we tell them, hey, you better do well so that you can get into a good high school. Then they finally in a good high school, we say to them, you better do well so you can get into a good college. And then again, they get into a good college, and we say, well, you better do well so you can get a first good job. They get that first job, you better do well so you can get a good promotion. You get a good promotion, you better do well so that you can get an even better promotion. They get a better promotion, you better do well so that you can retire well. We're always living in the future. It's unbelievable. But it is these times, these uncertain times, that teach us most how the future is really, truly uncertain. And instead of putting all of our eggs in that basket called future, we ought to put maybe most of our eggs in this basket called present, because the present is forever evading us because of our obsession towards the future. But now, during these times, we ought to heed to the call of the present, because as Rabbi Steinsaltz again says, all we have is really now. It's not that we don't have to prepare for the future. We definitely have to. But we cannot allow the present to evade us, because it has so many blessings. Every moment is truly full with so many opportunities. And if we allow this moment and next moment and the following moment to go away and to escape, we'll be missing the most important blessings of life. That is what Judaism offers as tool number 2. And I derive much inspiration, again, from the reference here at the top of the sheet, of the second sheet. But this tells the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who became brothers-in-law. It was a very interesting story. But they were once both walking in Tiberias towards the hot springs of Tiberias. By the way, these hot springs still exist, and every one of you here can still go to Tiberias. I mean, I don't know during these times if we can travel to Israel, but when Israel opens its borders and this pandemic is, please God, speedily eradicated from our planet, then we can return to Israel and you can go to Tiberias, to these hot springs. But 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were walking towards those hot springs. Again, you can follow this story at the top of the second page. And then this is what it says. As they were walking towards the hot springs, a pauper approached these two sages and asked them for charity. Now, they replied to him, I'm skipping some lines, they replied to him, to this pauper asking for charity, you know what? When we return from bathing, we'll give you something. They went to bathe. No one knows how long they stayed. Maybe they stayed for an hour. Maybe they stayed for 7 hours. No one knows. But when they returned, they found that the poor beggar had died. He had collapsed. Now, I just want to pause the story for a second. Put yourselves in their shoes. Ask yourselves, if you were Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, you're on your way to Tiberias, to these hot springs, and a pauper stops you and says, please give me money. You basically ignore him, and you continue on. You say, I'll come back. When I come back, I'll give you some money. You come back and you find this person dead. Wouldn't your heart, like mine, be filled with guilt feelings? Wouldn't you feel so terrible to say to yourself, gosh, maybe he died because of me? If I had given him some money, if I'd given him some food, he would have been able to nourish himself and it would have saved their life. How many hours of therapy do you think you would need if this was your scenario? I mean, most people, I don't know, I'm thinking about me, but most people will really go ballistic. This is terrible. The guy died because of me. But instead, let's continue the story. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish know that sinking emotions have no place in Judaism. Depression has no place in Jewish vocabulary. What do? Instead of blaming themselves and launching this guilt trip, they see this man dead. And then instead, again, of dwelling on their emotions, all they do is this. They both said to each other, and I'm quoting, since we did not merit being here for him during his lifetime, let us at least help him after his death. If we dwell in emotions, this mitzvah that is presenting to us right now at this moment of burying the dead will evade us. It's not about us and our emotions. It's about what life wants from us, what we have to do now at this very moment. That's what they're saying. Let us at least help him after his death. So what they did is again exclaim, let us prepare the body for burial. Let's purchase a plot for him. Let's bury him and place a tomb on his grave. They took the body to cleanse it and prepared it for burial. As they do so, listen to this. They found in his pocket a purse full of money. It turned out that this pauper was actually not a pauper. He was a liar. He was a swindler. He was rich, but he was too stingy to use his own money. Again, a story from the Jerusalem Talmud. As they were preparing him for burial, they found that he had a lot of money. Now, thank God, they don't have to go on this guilt trip. They don't have to feel guilty at all. The guy was asking money, but he didn't need it. It's his fault that he died. It's not their fault whatsoever. What is the Talmud trying to teach us, ladies and gentlemen? I think that, again, almost refines this idea, this tool of the power of now. And Talmud is trying to teach us that just like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, we each face moments in life where we say to ourselves, gosh, I should have known better. Gosh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? But the the Talmud teaches us that there is no place for those emotions. Instead, listen to what life wants from you now. And if you do so, that's the end of the story. That's what the end of the story teaches us. If we do so, if we can truly to listen to what this very moment wants from us, not just what we want from it, but what it wants from us, then we'll discover things that were never part of our consciousness, that could ever become a part of a consciousness. We'll discover things that may just teach us that there was no room for even thinking about being guilty to begin with. Just like Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, because they heed the call of the very moment in front of them, they discovered, oh, this man was a liar. There was no room. You see, thank God we didn't go into these emotions of guilt. That is, I think, Judaism's perspective on anxieties in general. Sometimes we launch ourselves into these anxieties because of the troubles of the past or because of the fears of the future, that we forget to live the moment and do the mitzvah that is asked upon us right now. But Judaism believes that we, again, have to live the moment as it is today. Listen to it, connect to it, and to the calling, the mitzvahs that it wants from us. I think this is why we say each and every morning, again, quoting here from the references, that in His grace, in God's grace, He renews every single day consistently the work of the creation. Every moment is a moment that has never come here before. It's renewed. And because it's renewed, then there is really no escaping it. We ought to become in tune with this new moment. It's almost like, I think it was Sigmund Freud who famously said that we don't live throughout a lifetime. We are resuscitated at every moment throughout our lifetimes. Every moment is a new life. And if we can't become in tune with it, then it escapes, then we actually miss the purpose for which we were created at this very moment. And I just want to conclude this idea maybe with another verse, but with another story also. But this idea with one of my favorite verses in the entire Torah. Picture yourselves again as Moses. It's really one of my favorite verses because it shares so much wisdom. But Moses is a poor shepherd, and he is shepherding his sheep in the mountains of Midian. This is after he had to escape Egypt because Pharaoh wanted to murder him, if you remember the biblical story. He's now an isolated shepherd, and as he's shepherding his sheep one day, he sees this interesting sight of a burning bush. He continues on, leaves the bush, but then he says to himself, boy, Asura na ve'ere, let me go back and see what this sight was all about. So he turns around, he leaves his sheep. He turns around to see what this interesting sight was all about. There he sees a burning bush. And then the Torah says as follows: when God saw that Moses turned around to see this bush, then he called to him, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Hineni, here I am. And then God proceeds to tell him, you will become my next, the leader of the Jewish people. Why does the Torah have to present to us the description? Because what it is telling us is that we too are like shepherds, shepherding our sheep, shepherding our own lives, going on with our own plans in life. But sometimes God sends us an interesting sight, a call of the moment. But like most shepherds, most of us are just too consumed with our sheep, too consumed with our own personal plan, that we forget to see the sights that God planted for us. But when we stop for a second and pause to smell the flowers as they smell the roses, as they say, and say to ourselves, well, it's not just about us and our plans. It's about what God has planted for us in our journeys throughout the paved ways of the paths of our lives. And we stop and we say, God, what is this? Is this a burning bush? Is this a mitzvah that I have to perform? When we stop, then God also calls us and says, oh, that's the person I'm looking for, a person that is so open to life that is able to come in tune with everything in his or her own life. That person will be my next Moses, as he tells the original Moses. That person will be my next leader, as he tells the original leader. It is one of my favorite verses of life because I truly believe in this approach. Or as Viktor Frankl so powerfully says, we shouldn't ask what we want from life, but we should ask what life wants from us. That's when purpose comes into play. And that's when we can truly leave our anxieties behind and connect to the blessing and to the reassurance of the moment. I want to just conclude this point, this tool, before we go on to the final tool, the tool number 3, with a story that I shared here in our congregation about 2 weeks ago. But it's a story that stayed with me because it makes this point so loudly, so clearly. So I'm friendly here with the local congressman, and I won't mention his name because of the story. And a few weeks ago, he calls me aside and he tells me, Rabbi, I have to tell you the story in private. I don't want everyone to hear it, but I am so moved by what you did for me and my family. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, my wife was married to a Palestinian who did not like Jews, to say the least. Then she married me and she found this very pro-Israel, pro-Jewish man. This congressman, again, he's telling me. But she still remained with her own opinions that were influenced by this ex-husband. Until you opened your gates to your congregation and we were exposed to the beauty of Judaism time and time again. Indeed, this congressman visited us a few times. And then my wife's opinion on the Jewish people and on Israel in general had changed completely. She's now more pro-Israel and pro-Jewish than I am. And I said to myself, gosh, you see, our congregation heeded the call of the moment. We had a person, we could have ignored him, we could have somehow been polite to him, but really not being completely present with him. But instead, we decided, you know what, let's embrace him fully, unreservedly. And it created this blessing that even our own imagination could not fathom. That is the power of living in the now. There is so much opportunity, so much blessing, so much sweetness in each and every moment. And if we become completely in tune with the moment that is presented in front of us and leave the fears of the future or the troubles of the past behind us, then we'll be able to create this ripple effect of light that even our own imagination cannot fathom, like this story clearly portrays. That's tool number 2. And finally, tool number 3, and then we'll open this up to any questions you may have. But tool number 3 is to remember that a little stress is actually pretty good. We try to fight stress, we try to fight anxieties, yet we should fight anxieties that control us completely. We shouldn't accept any mode of panic that control our psyche. But we also have to remember that a little dose of panic, a little dose of fear, a little dose of stress is good. How do we learn this? We learn this from the American Lobster. It's a magazine that speaks about how lobsters grow. Be surprised why a rabbi speaks about lobsters, but I want to read and quote you from this magazine that shares so much wisdom again from a lobster. This is what it says. Again, if you have, if you were able to open my reference sheets on the chat of this Zoom, then you'll be able to follow again these references here. It's on the 3rd sheet at the top of the page. But this is what it says. Because the shell of a lobster is hard, it must shed its shell in order to grow. This overall process is known as molting. But how does this happen? During the molting process, a lobster throws itself into a V shape, lies on its side, and begins to withdraw from its old shell. The withdrawal begins when the large flexible membrane that joins the carapace and abdomen stretches and splits. Basically, in order for a lobster to grow, it needs to forego of its shell because its shell is very confining. So it finds a rock and lies there, foregoes of its shell, and then once the shell is gone, he's able to grow a new shell that is not confining anymore to his grown body. Then it goes on. I'm not going to read from the quote anymore. It might be a little bit scientifically complicated, but I'm explaining. Then it grows this new shell that is not confining anymore. But after a few months, it becomes confining again. Why? Because the body of the lobster continued to grow. So the lobster has to go again under this rock, forego of his shell, and again grow a new shell that is bigger and not confining anymore to his grown body. And he does this multiple times. But the point is this, ladies and gentlemen, it's brilliant. What makes a lobster grow? Stress. His ability to feel the stress within his own body and to say, you know what, it's time for a new shell. Let me go under the rock and create for myself a new shell. Without stress, a lobster does not grow. I think it's true for human beings too. Without stress, we do not grow. I'm going to challenge everyone here on this Zoom call to think of the points in their own lives when they experience the most growth. I would submit to you that it's probably moments of stress and moments of challenge that made you grow the most. It's definitely true for my own life. But why? Because a little bit of stress is indeed good, and that's why it's fascinating. But the word for trial, for challenge in Hebrew is nisayon. We are told by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi in the second references on the 3rd page that nisayon in Hebrew does not just mean trial, but it comes also from the word nisa or nes, which means miracle. Because in every challenge, there is an opportunity for a miracle. And we have to connect to the stress of the challenge to find out exactly what the miracle is that lies beneath it. And if we're able, again, to use stress, channel it in the right way, not run away from our challenges, but quite the opposite. Use the stress to open our eyes a little more to the blessings that are in them, in those trials, in those challenges, then no doubt we'll also stress was not only good, but it led to good itself. You know, it's interesting to point out, but I'm a big fan of classical music. And as you may know, many classical musicians, not many, sorry, very few classical musicians today play the Stradivarius violin. Yitzhak Perlman, in my eyes, is the best violinist in the world. I know some of you may disagree here, but he plays on the Stradivarius violin. Joshua Bell plays on the Stradivarius violin. Many, not many others, but a few other musicians who have the money play on the Stradivarius violin. Why am I saying they have the money? Because the Stradivarius violin cost about $2, $3, $4, $5 million. So you need a mortgage to buy one. But what's so special about it the Stradivarius violin, it's fascinating scientifically, but also spiritually. The Stradivarius violin was created by Antonio Stradivari in the 1700s. And the wood that he used in order to create the Stradivarius violin creates the sweetest song, the sweetest music, sweetest melodies. That's why these best musicians want to use it. But what type of wood did he use exactly? Listen to this. You can research this yourself. He used the wood of the broken gondolas on the Venice beaches. That's where he lived. He went to the Venice beaches. He found these broken logs of wood from those broken gondolas, and he created with them the Stradivarius violins. Now, some say it's the moisture in the wood that makes this the music that stems from it so sweet. No one really knows. But my theory is based on the theory that we just presented, and that is that from the brokenness of life, you can create the sweetest music. Indeed, that brokenness shakes us. That shaking is good because it allows us to recalibrate our lives, focus on the important, and allow the trivial to become trivial once again. I think that's why Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the Hasidic master, famously says that there is nothing as straight as a ladder, even though a ladder is crooked if you think about this, and there is nothing as wholesome as a broken heart. Because when you're a little bit crooked like a ladder, and when you're a little bit broken-hearted, then you are wholesome, then it leads you to wholesomeness, then it leads you to question the big questions of life. And if you're able to answer them, again, heed the call of that challenge and listen to the opportunity that it has within, then you're able to grow in ways that nothing else in life can make us grow. I want to conclude maybe with this story again, and then we'll open this up to questions. But this, and summarize first the three tools, and then open this up to questions. But a story about Zev Kitsis, who was the student of the Baal Shem Tov that we mentioned before, the founder of the Hasidic movement. But Zev Kitsis was once asked by the Baal Shem Tov to be the shofar blower on Rosh Hashanah. The shofar blower now in the synagogue of the Baal Shem Tov was tasked not just with blowing the shofar, but with preparing himself for this blowing of the shofar, to know exactly what meditations to have in mind as he blows the shofar, what to think of, and so on and so forth. So Zev Kitsis prepared himself for that moment in a very careful and very immersive way. When Rosh Hashanah came, he decided to take all of his notes that he had written, all of his meditations that he had written on a piece of paper, and put it in the middle of his Rosh Hashanah book, so that when the time will come for him to blow the shofar, all he'll have to do is open up the Rosh Hashanah book, take out the piece of paper, and focus on all of the meditations that he had written down to be fully prepared for that moment. The moment came, Zev Kitsis walked on stage to blow the shofar on that Rosh Hashanah. He opens his book, and lo and behold, that paper that he had prepared with all of the meditations for the blowing of the shofar was nowhere to be found. He was devastated. He didn't know what to do. The entire crowd was waiting for him to blow the shofar, but he could not. All of his months and months of preparation were going down the drain at that moment. He couldn't wait any longer. Everyone was waiting impatiently, so he blew the shofar, and he blew it with a broken heart. At the end of the prayer, he didn't even want to face the Baal Shem Tov. He was too shy. He thought this was a complete failure on his part. So he avoided him as much as possible, but the Baal Shem Tov called him. And he, with his head down, he told the Baal Shem Tov, "I'm terribly sorry. I had prepared all of these meditations. I know you had asked me to be the shofar, but I lost a piece of paper at the last second." The Baal Shem Tov said, "That's not why I'm calling you. I'm calling you to tell you that this was the best shofar blowing I ever heard in my life. It opened all of the gates of heaven open." Zev Kitsis was now astounded. He said, "How do you mean? What do you mean? How could that be? I lost a piece of paper." And the Baal Shem Tov explained to Zev Kitsis, he says, "You have to understand, you prepared all these meditations, and you're right. Every meditation opens up a different gate of the heavens. But there is one master key that opens up all of the gates at once. That master key," tells Zev Kitsis, "is called the broken heart. If you have a broken heart, you can open all of the gates of the heavens at once. It is your master key to God. That idea, friends, is the idea of tool number 3. Yes, we face uncertain times. There's a lot of turbulence in our own personal and collective lives, but we dare not shy away from the little stress that it can provide, that these times can provide, to shake ourselves up and to make the important and trivial, to refocus on our families, to refocus on our values, to refocus on that which is truly vital in our lives. When we have that broken heart from the broken times we live in, then we also have the master key that opens up all of our gates and all of the gates of the heavens. So to summarize very quickly, and then we can open this up to questions for just a few minutes, taking control of our anxieties and navigating through uncertain times is done through 3 tools that Judaism has to offer. Tool number 1 is to recognize that God is our partner and he has our back. He holds our hand and he's there for us. It is therefore time also to increase our connection with this partner. Shout to him, beg to him that he brings healing and peace upon our lives and upon this world. He's our partner. We have to have full trust in him, and that trust in and of itself can create wonders and truly a change of direction for our world. He, as much as we are helping him by bettering the world, he helps us also by bettering the world. We have to have trust in him and in that partnership. Tool number 2 is the idea that there is so much blessing in the now that dare we not escape to the troubles of the past or to the fears of the future. There is so much opportunity that is presented right now that we cannot allow anxieties to rob us from those opportunities and disconnect us from the blessing of the now. And tool number 3, again, is not to shy away entirely from the panic or from the fear or from the stress, because a little bit of it is good. It shakes our heart, makes it a little bit broken. That in and of itself provides us with the master key that opens our gates, opens the gates of the heavens, and also at the same time enables us to grow and grow, dare I say, like a lobster, or even better, like each and every one of us should each and every day. I'm going to unmute all. You can choose to remute yourselves, but I'm going to unmute all for the purpose of taking your questions. And before I do so, I remind everyone that we'll have another class tomorrow evening at 7:30 with your questions. So please email me your questions, many questions you may have, concerns, etc. During these uncertain times. I promise to address them all. I'm unmuting you now, and please feel free to ask your questions one person at a time. Again, you can choose to remute yourselves. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. You know what? I'm sorry. I have a bad idea. I'm sorry. I'm going to mute all. If you have a question, you can still unmute yourself and ask it. So again, I'm muting everyone now. And again, let's continue with your question. Was it Judy who was asking the question?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, good. So now just unmute yourself, beautiful, like you did, and you can ask your question. In the meantime, everyone else, please continue to mute yourself so that we can hear the question. Yes.
Some people say that during this pandemic, this is the result. Maybe God is Canada, or he's something.
Right.
Our behavior. What is that?
Okay, that's a great question. Again, I'm muting everybody. So it's a great question. Thank you, Judy. Judy asked the question of, some people say, and I've seen that also, unfortunately, by rabbis in different places in the world, that God is bringing this upon us because he's mad at us, he's angry at us, he's trying to teach us this lesson or that lesson. I would say Judaism wholeheartedly, fully, unequivocally disagrees with that approach. Why? Because at the very foundation of Judaism, we recognize that we are finite and God is infinite. And a finite brain cannot always grasp the infinite, cannot ever, I think, grasp the infinite fully unless the infinite speaks directly to man. And why is God doing this? No one knows. I mean, if you say you know, you're either a fool or a liar. But I don't think Judaism can understand the infinite. We're all finite beings at the end of the day with finite brains. But I do think that we should change the question of why to the question of what can we do about it. Judaism does not believe in passivity. The question of why is a passive question. Judaism believes in activism, in turning the whys into what can we do about it. That's an active question. And we each have a lot to do about this pandemic. First and foremost, we have to listen to the health experts and take every precautionary measure to protect ourselves, our communities, and our world. But number two, what we can do about this is that although we are all exercising social distancing and seclusion, we cannot allow that to replace the social bonding and the inclusion that we ought to exercise on a daily basis. As God himself tells us in the Torah, to love our fellow as ourselves, to say to each other, as Isaiah says, let me help you, and let me strengthen you. That's our human vital duty. So what can we do about it? Is to strengthen our bond with one another, if not physical, then certainly spiritual, to replace, like I wrote, every physical hug that we cannot give with a mental hug, every hand that cannot be shaken physically ought to be shaken spiritually with love and conditional care. Every distance that is taken because of any suspicions ought to be filled with even more dedication to one another. And every mezuzah that is not kissed, every Torah that is not kissed, lest we are contaminated with germs, ought to be replaced with a spiritual kiss towards our own traditions and heritage. I think that that's what we can do about it beyond the health precautions. And that's a way to replace the why with the what we can do about it. And hopefully, in that way, I think we'll again become partners with God, and God will hopefully do his part to heal us, and we'll do our part to heal humanity spiritually.